being up here anyway. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this, and this does, I suppose, follow on well with what Matt and Glenn have spoken about. So what I'm going to talk about, just very briefly really, is what you can do, because I know most people here have your family trees done. You're not starting out without any information whatsoever. You have a family tree, but you might be in the midst of have several brick walls, or trying to figure out what other sources can I look at or are out there for me to consider. And what I do as a genealogist, I have a genealogy business, Dalcassian Origins. I look at genealogy resources together with local history resources and other sources and repositories and collections. I have a master's in local history, so the local history is very helpful with the genealogy research. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So Sean, do you mind just clicking? Thank you. As we know, just very briefly, most of the collections that we know about consist of Catholic and Church of Ireland parish registers. They're starting points for many of us, for most of us, I suppose. We know about Griffith's valuation and the the Plotman books. I know there's been some discussion from previous speakers about those. And that's a review of the land and the occupancy, those occupiers of the holdings there for Griffith's valuation in the 1850s and earlier in the the Plotman books. And then the civil registration, which covers births, marriages, and deaths that are registered, and that's a key word there, but they only start for the most part in 1864. And so while they're great, they're free resources, a lot of them are, and they're very helpful, they don't always cover the information. They only take us to a certain point, and then we need to find other avenues to research. Sean, do you mind? Thank you. So the challenges, what are the challenges for research? There can be a limitation to records. You can have a situation where the registers only start at a period of time, or there's lots of gaps in them. You can have a situation where people didn't register life events. They didn't register deaths. Births may not have been registered, or the priest didn't register or write down the baptism records, or the baptisms for whatever reason. Records don't always survive, and it's often the case of very small farmers, and women are often not noted, particularly women. Women are often kept out of any records, and that's a very unfortunate situation because women are often hidden in history. So it's very important if we can get access to, or if there are records out there that women are included in. The early part of the 19th century, resources can be few and far between, and as I said, women are silent, as are landless laborers in a lot of the resources that we would normally use. If you want to move ahead, Sean, again, thank you. So how do we overcome these challenges? So there's a couple of things up there, and I'm going to go through each one of them. First is local studies. We have landed estates. Second, virtual treasury, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with virtual treasury. Some of you might be. And then archive collections. And these are things that people often don't consider. Local studies are something that are very important, and our national library system, our county councils have become very proactive in regard to local studies. Tipperary studies, some of you may be familiar with Tipperary studies. They operate out of Thurles. They have a very good online website with lots of different resources that you can access. And like that, they get in collections and they digitize them. So they are worth looking at for Tipperary, if you have Tipperary ancestry. Cork City and County archives are also very, very good. Great for headstones, graveyards, for land records, for local records that you might not get anywhere else. Limerick City Archives, another another very good resource there. They have lots of newspaper reports. They have some family papers that have gone online, and in addition, they have recently digitized the Toman Archaeological and Historical Society journals. I think they're the Field Club journals, so they're worth looking at as well. Kerry County Archives, another county council initiative there, and then Waterford County Archives. And these county archives, they often hold a variety of collections. They can include estate papers, private papers can be included, or local resources that are unique to their area. So they, it's not a one-size-fits-all. They can have a variety of different resources. So local studies are something that you should always consider, and to access them, it's just a matter of going into whether it's Waterford County Council or Limerick County Council. I have some of those put up, and you're welcome to screenshot that. But any county council, whether it's Leitrim or whether it's Roscommon, anywhere in the country, it's something that's becoming very consistent right throughout the country. So do you mind moving that? Great. So landed estates database and papers. So the landed estates, they're a collection of papers dealing with two statutes there, the Encumbered Estates Act and the Landed Estates Court Rentals. And these were two collections that took place between 1848 and 1885. Essentially, the Encumbered Estates Act were the NAMA of the 19th century. And they really were the collections there where land was had to be sold by virtue of bankruptcy or an indebtedness. Now, they record the sale of the indebted estates, but within those sale documents, they have beautiful maps. They have place names. They have names of tenants, the rents that the tenants might be paying, and the area of ground that the tenants may be occupying. So they can be really valuable for that purpose. The collection is held at the University of Galway, but the subscription site Find My Past has the papers for this. The County Clare Local Studies Center has the Clare records. So if anybody has Clare ancestry, those records are actually they're not online, but you can actually view them if you visit the Clare Library. They really are very good, and you just never know what you're going to find. I had a case there looking for a Catholic tenant who couldn't figure out his ancestry, and it was a landed estate court rental paper that noted not only the name, well, he knew the name of the person he was looking for, but that person was the third son of an individual, and it listed out each son and what each son's portion of the tenancy had been. So they really can be very, very helpful. The Landed Estates database comes through the University of Galway or the Moore Institute, but that is very interesting from the point of view that lists estates, houses, and families associated with land in Ireland. Now, what's nice about that is you can search that either by families or by houses. And what it often does is it'll give you a list of information about the houses, the land, a bit of the history about the family and the estate. And at the bottom of it, it will give you a link to other sources, and it can also give you information as to where estate papers might be held. Okay, so if you were interested in a particular estate, the location of estate papers could be very, very useful for you. Okay, can you move the slide? Great. Virtual treasury. Has anybody or has everybody heard of the virtual treasury, or people are not? Okay, so the virtual treasury is a website that has come about as a result of the Beyond 2022 project. And the Beyond 2022 project is a joint venture between Trinity College and other institutions in Europe and around the world for the purpose of reconstructing the documents that were destroyed in the Four Courts fire 3 years ago now, in 1922. Those documents, many of those documents, and when the forecourts, when it blew up, paper went everywhere, but people were asked to bring in documents that they had found on the ground. And many people did bring those in, these scraps of paper, these extracts. And what has happened was they were boxed and put away for years, until there was there was the technology there to be able to do something with them, to try and recreate them or to reconstruct them. And this is what's being done now. It's a fantastic project. It's very, very interesting. The website is worth looking at because the website is continuously being updated. As a matter of fact, I think in the last 6 months, they were putting on an additional 100,000 documents that they were able to, to work with. So you can search it by a variety of terms, whether it's county, it's surnames, it's townlands, it's place names, and it's one of those things that you go into and you need to keep going back to because it can be a bit, there's so much in there, it can be a bit overwhelming, but it's well worth looking at, and it is something that is going to be become much more important over time as documents, as these reconstruction processes are, get better and better. So that is something that everybody should be aware of. And can we move the slide one more again? So archive collections. Archive collections are, they're around. They've become very popular. People are realizing the importance of papers and making donations to collections. Instead of throwing out some of the stuff in the attic after a person dies, maybe the local library or the local archive, county archive might be interested. So that's what they do. The Robert O'Brien papers are an example of this. Robert O'Brien was a second cousin to the O'Briens of Dromoland. He was also their land agent. Those papers were held privately for the last 40 years, at least 38 boxes of those papers. And when we're talking boxes, we're talking metal trunks. That were kept, and they have been donated, a number of them, to Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, where they are being cataloged. The Bindon Blood papers were donated privately very recently there to the Clare County Archives, and then another part of those papers were purchased and donated by Clare Root Society. And UL Special Collections, University of Limerick Special Collections, which has a website continuously getting new papers, new collections. And this is something that, again, you should be checking with. UCC has special collections too. And don't forget to have a look at people's theses, whether they're master's theses or PhD thesis. You never know what you can find about a family or about a place or about an area in reading some of these documents. So can you move the forward again there? Great. So other collections you can look at, schools collection and the folklore collection. You might be know about the schools collection. The schools collection was the collection that they went around the country in Ireland, and they took school children in 1937 and 1938 were asked to get stories from their parents and the older people in the area, and these stories were transcribed, they were written down, and they were collected. And there's lots of information about local areas, about local families, about particular families and particular events that occurred that can be very useful. And that collection then was continued on. It was so successful that those that were taking the stories down continued to submit stories, and those are slowly being put online at the Dukas website. So that's a really good website to look at, and it's very interesting, great for local history. Kirby Miller Emigrant Letters Collection. Kirby Miller is a very well-known Irish academic, Irish-American historian who donated his emigrant letters collection to the University of Galway, and that has now been digitized and is online. I've actually had the pleasure of being able to look at that, because when I did my PhD thesis, I discovered I had cousins that had letters that were in that collection. So you just never know what's there. And if any of you are familiar with the book Emigrants and Exiles, a book that Kirby Miller wrote there, he covered a lot of the letters that he had accumulated over many years were covered in that book, and those are also in that collection there. Historic graves, and we have John Tierney here, so I say no more. Another fantastic resource, as you well know, and I'm sure you've been around headstones this past week, that headstones cover, many, many years before civil registration and even before parish registers, and they can be, just fantastic for information about family history. Local history journals and societies, because local history has become very, very popular, really since the 1970s. But with all these commemorations we've done, the decade of commemorations and the gathering that we did, there's a real interest in local histories and sharing stories about families and local areas, and they can often be very, very useful for information about family, your own family history. And the last one that I mentioned there is the heritagemaps.ie. That's a relatively new website. Now, it's a maps website, it's not, but I think it's interesting to look at, particularly when you know the area where your family came from. It's a kind of the one-stop shop. You go into it and you can look up maps from various areas, and they cover a lot of different topics. It can be a very useful. We used it last semester in a geography class that I was teaching with another lecturer for projects of local interest in local areas. So it can be very, very useful. And you can watch how an area changes over time. And one more slide there, I think, Sean. Thank you, that's great. So my final thoughts, and I hope I haven't raced through it for people, is that you really look at your family history, and I said this Wednesday night to my local history class there in Portumna, using the 3 strands of research: people, place, and time. And using those 3 strands can often assist you with investigating and gathering more evidence about your family, your family research. Consider each of them above independently and consider them as they interact with one another. I also want to note that archives are a living source. Archives are always being updated, so it is well worth noting and going back to any of the websites that I've mentioned, any of the local studies, the virtual treasury, to see what has been added or what is new. There is always new information coming up. So I think that's it. I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much for your time and attention.